Hello everyone, and welcome to Unspoken. In 1 Peter 3:15, Peter reminds Christians of an enormous privilege that is ours. We are told that we are to set apart Christ as Lord in our hearts and to honor the Lordship of Jesus. But we're also told that we have a great opportunity to give a reason for the hope that we have. The way we speak to those who ask us and maybe challenge us and sometimes criticize us should always be with gentleness and with respect. But we also need to be quite robust in engaging with people, in providing answers, in giving a Christian perspective on things that are happening both in our own country and elsewhere in the world. Part of the struggle that we have as Christians is that we don't always know what to say. We don't always have the answers. The questions are there, we grapple with these things, but perhaps out of fear for not knowing what to say, or perhaps a fear of offending someone, we just leave things unspoken. And so our goal in this conversation today with Cameron Shabangu, who's a member of our staff, and with Karen Nelson, who's a member of our congregation, our goal today is to have a conversation, and in particular today, to have a conversation around the issues of race, around some of the reaction that we've seen to the death of George Floyd, the brutal killing of George Floyd in Minneapolis, something that has sent shockwaves around the world. It's provoked protests and it's provoked all sorts of challenges for people, issues about power, issues about brutality, issues around white privilege. If you were able to listen to the memorial service last night, you would have heard things said there that might have unsettled you or challenged you or caused you to think. Cameron, Karen, it's lovely to have you with us. Thank you so much for making time to have this important conversation and for being willing to be open and honest and engaged around this issue and, God willing, in the future around other issues as we talk about the things that really matter to us as Christians. Before we get down to what is a serious issue, there have been some little moments of joy and celebration in both the Shabangu and the Nelson household. Cameron, there's a new baby in the home. Just tell us his name and tell us how you guys are doing.
Thanks, Mervyn, for giving us the opportunity to have this important conversation and for opening up the door for us to engage. No, the family's doing well. We have a new baby boy, Enzo Ruhle, Lucy Shabangu, and he's growing up well. He's about 2 weeks old now, so it's a real blessing from the Lord.
His name means great things, or he will do great things, and shepherd.
Yes.
So I've been learning my Zulu a little bit, checking up on the names. So am I to understand that your hope and Lele's hope for him is that he will become a shepherd of God's people and do great things for God?
Almost definitely. And so I'm a pastor to give him a biblical name. So, but yeah, definitely have like if you know the whole story of how things happened, he was a real blessing from the Lord and a miracle from us, and so therefore I really want to dedicate him to the Lord, not like Samuel, but essentially that as a thank you from God. Well,
we're so grateful to God for that miracle. Corin, you guys have had a bittersweet moment. It's Hugo's 50th birthday on Wednesday, so it was a lockdown celebration. Tell us a bit about that.
Yes, Mervyn, it was a celebration with a difference. If you know anything about us, about me, I love a big party. We love marking special occasions in our family. We think it's important. And so we did that as far as we could. We missed our family, we missed our friends, but we had a party, and it was amazing.
Well, thank God for you and Hugo and the family and for your contribution to the life of our church. For those who don't know, Hugo is also chairman of our management council, and I've benefited personally from his wisdom. And I take it that after 50, his wisdom will increase. And I'm looking forward to lots of good input. Now, 25 May, Minneapolis, an arrest happens The circumstances of that arrest are actually now so irrelevant. The circumstances around the arrest, though, the terrible image of a man pinned to the pavement with a white policeman's knee upon his neck, and then the tragic circumstances leading to the death of George Floyd. This has sent shockwaves around the world. We've had protests, we've had just a massive response from people. Interestingly enough, I've also been taken aback by the fact that there are those within our own country, and certainly in conversations I've had, where people have said, look, this is America, this is police brutality in America. You know, why are we even meeting today to talk about this? I mean, what's the big deal? This happens all the time. Why is this worth talking about? Cameron, one of your privileges on staff at St. James is to be talking to university students. Just give us a feel for how they are engaged with the issue. I mean, are they saying, COVID-19, jobs, that's the big issue, this is not relevant? What's been your experience?
So I think this, it's relevant in two ways. On a basic level, and secondly on a deeper level. The basic level is just on humanity. Just seeing someone being killed on video is something that should break us as Christians, not even as Christians, just as human beings, to seeing that happen. But also on the more underlining level, especially as a black man, one of the things that has happened to us as black people is racism and colonialism and all those things. Yeah. And one thing that has resulted is almost a shared experience. Yes. That what happened to them there, it's not completely far to believe that it could happen to me. Yes. So that's why even if somebody gets murdered, a black man in Limpopo on the other side of the country, I feel it here, because if it could happen to him, then it could definitely happen to me. Yes. And so on those two basic levels, that's why it's actually felt. And it's really one thing it has happened, back to your question, with the people that I engage with, is that it just brings back your experience of how you have experienced racism. And it does not necessarily have to be as a result of police, but just on your experience as a black person living in this world.
Yeah. Corin, you, the mother of teenage children as well, and just from your daughter, your son Daniel, from Hannah. I mean, Hannah's a student. She's obviously at the forefront of a lot of conversation with her friends. Just following on from what Cameron's been saying, what's your experience been, and how do you feel about this issue and its relevance for us here in our country, in Cape Town?
Mervyn, before I answer that question specifically, I just want to backtrack a little bit and pick up on something you said in your intro, and it's surfaced as well in your introductory remarks with Cameron, is the question that you have been confronted with relating to why is it even a thing? Why are we even discussing that today? And for me, that question shows up the privilege that some have and others don't. I think it's a privilege to even ask that question. For me, it's not even a question. It's how can we not lament? How can we not grieve? It goes to, for me, the dehumanization of people. This is a fellow human being. And I think that sits at the heart of the woundedness that we're seeing. Because that is what I'm seeing when I engage with my daughter, when I engage with her about the conversations she's having with friends. It is a deep woundedness that requires looking at And this is one forum in which we can look at that and start thinking about, well, if there's a wound, how do we heal that wound?
One of the things that has, sorry, I'm interrupting you because you wanted to also respond to my question. Is there anything you wanted to add, just at a more general level?
There's loads
No, that's
to add.
fine. There's a lot to add. We'll carry on with that.
Sure.
Just you know, speaking as a white South African, I'm very conscious, and I really owe. I mean, I owe the wonderful diversity of our congregation for this, and I owe my friendship with Cameron for this as well, and with others. I've realized that I so often don't listen well. When stuff gets put on the agenda, it's so easy to want to react, respond, speak, give an opinion. And I'm very conscious that I need to take a different posture of listening. I think that's a good posture generally as a human being. God's given us 2 ears, 1 mouth. Let's be slow to speak, slow to become angry, quick to listen, says James. And I've been conscious of the fact that there's a whole conversation and there's a whole experience that my fellow South Africans and my fellow Christians have. I'm talking people of color now, who don't. It's so foreign to my experience. You know, I guess I'm coming to the position where I have to own my privilege, face it, and say, you know, really, Mervyn, you really have been very privileged, and you don't understand sometimes. So it's time to listen and be more respectful to the conversation. Don't challenge the conversation, but rather be open to it. Corin, your charity work, ICU, is in an area of Cape Town which is kind of known for violence. And, you know, we've engaged a lot around the issue of gender-based violence. But picking up on what Cameron was saying as well, there's also the reality of violence against black men, and especially younger black men. And that's a real problem in our world. It's a problem in the areas where you're working. You've got boys. You've got 2 boys. They've got a way to go still in terms of age. As a mother, as a parent, how do you talk to your boys about this? Is there fear there? I mean, with Daniel, who's older, obviously, and more engaged, how's he feeling about these things? Your engagements with him?
Mervyn, I think as a mother, I'll get to Daniel and then the boys in the communities where we work. I think as a mother, as a Christian mother, what I desire for my children, including my boys, is that they develop a worldview that is centered on the Bible. And so what that means is, how do they look at themselves in relation to the world? How do they deal with the messaging that they receive from the world? Whether that is in the form of violence, brutality, whether it's more subtle, because I do think that one has to, when something like this happens, it is very public, it is very violent, it is very in your face. But that is not the sum total of racism. It is not the only way. So, we often encounter people saying, I'm not racist, I have black friends. Yeah. It is so much more. It is so much broader than that. It is manifested in the way we view ourselves. So how do I view myself? What is it? What are the messages that I'm taking in? And therefore, how do I relate to the world? So when I look at my children and when I look at my sons, I would like them, I deeply desire them to view other people and to view themselves in the right way, the way God views them.
Image of God.
And that is why I think these conversations are so important, because when I say, or when we hear the word expounded, and we are told that we are made in the image of God, and that there is unity in the body of Christ, which is amazing. It is an amazing truth. But what does that look like when I'm confronted with what I would call the insidious racism that we encounter, not the public violent manifestation of it? So that's why I think it is important that we have these conversations in our church, amongst each other, not shy away from it, learn to listen, learn to grieve the fact that I am the product of a system that taught me that there is, whiteness is something to aspire to,
Yes.
and blackness is something to be fearful of.
Yes.
And then I'm somewhere in the middle.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so if we do not confront that, I mean, it's one thing to have laws that have been dismantled, but those laws were written by people. And those laws, in a sense, come from people's hearts.
And just on that, I mean, I've got 2 young boys. I mean, they're all nice and cute. I mean, they'll kill you with cuteness. But I know there's a time that they'll grow up, and that they'll be no longer viewed as cute, but they'll be viewed as black and black men. And so therefore that carries a lot of weightiness.
Yes.
And it's almost like a thing of, okay, is something to be feared. And they have to navigate in this world as it is now, because it is a fallen world. We read in Genesis how sin entered the world and tainted everything that God made good, and it's foolish of us to think that sin has not worked its way into our structures and into our systems and the way that we do life today. And one of the big ways it reveals itself is through racism and prejudice, and it's still active today. And I have to teach my boys that this is the world that you live in, that because of the color of your skin, you are going to be treated differently. You are going to experience certain levels of prejudice and opportunities taken away from you, not because of how eloquent you are or lack of education, but it could be because of your skin. And that is something that we need to really put on the table and realize that even though as a country we have moved on and we are not in the dark old days of apartheid, but the ripple effects of that is still felt today. And it still has implications today. And you see it even now with the university, where now even with this lockdown and everyone's meant to study from home, some students are like, how can we study from home? Because it just, it's not possible. And so some people have the privileges of fast internet and fast ways to access information, but then some are just left to the wayside. And so it just exposes the gaps that still exist today. And there are gaps based on color lines and the way that people find themselves and live in the environment. And it's based on the ripple effects of our past.
I mean, this lockdown has certainly exposed the socioeconomic divide in our country, and very often, not exclusively, but very often those have-not situations fall around issues of race as well. I was just listening this morning to the unemployment figures in the United States, and just the significant increase in unemployment. And almost as a matter of course, the reporter was saying that many of the people who are losing their work now are from minority groups within America, recognizing that the ethnic balance is quite completely different from our own. Cam, you and I have chatted many, many, many times around the difference between racism in terms of relationships and the language of structural racism. And it's taken me a while through reading and thinking and talking, to understand what it is that black people mean when they talk about structural racism versus racism. Do you just want to, for the benefit of those who are listening in, just tell us how you see these things and what you see the difference is and how you think they impact upon our lives here as a community?
So I believe that race as we know it, like it's not really, it's more of a social construct. So biblically, I think the only time the Bible speaks about race is 2 times in Acts 17, where, like the writer is saying that actually from one man God created all of humanity. So yes. In fact, biblically, we all have the same ancestor. So we're part of the human race. And then also in 1 Peter 2, where Paul says, like, you're a holy priesthood, a chosen race. Yes. And so therefore he makes a distinction between Christian and non-Christian, between the believer and the non-believer, that as a believer you're part of this race yes. that belong to God's and for his purposes. Yes. And when we talk about ethnicity, I think it's a more helpful way, yeah. biblical way through which that it speaks about us as humans and the way that we should relate with each other. And so it speaks about language, about tribe, about every nation, that even culminating in Revelations 5 and 7, where it speaks about how we be one day seated around the throne, worshipping God of different languages and tongues, yes. praising God. Yes. And so therefore we celebrate the different ethnicities that we are part of, because we are part of the image of God has created us in the Imago Dei. But then when we look at the way that we understand race today, it's more like a divide under racial stratification, where you have white at the top, and then you have the people of color at the bottom, going down with blackness right at the very bottom.
So that image of the white policeman leaning on the neck, it's like the carrying in the Soweto photo. It's like that photo from the Vietnam War of the little girl running from the napalm attack. It's Hector Peterson being carried in 1976. It becomes a symbol, doesn't it, of a structural thing.
It is a structural thing. Yeah. So when you look at that, and it's almost like the way that the different structures in the world is organized, that it's white at the top and then the people of color at the bottom. Yeah. And if we really are to look in our world, and even look even specifically at our church, I was, before I became a minister, I was in corporate South Africa, and the structures there, surprisingly, still the same, white at the top and the people of color at the bottom. And it's not only through the representation, but it's also through the way that the culture, the dominant culture and the narrative that is happening is almost like what we called is, it's almost whiteness is the default way of not only communication, but the way that we interact as a society.
And you're not just talking language.
Not talking about language. It's much deeper than that.
Yeah. And it's the way I would describe it is it's the unspoken way of doing things.
That's a helpful, actually. That phrase is very helpful for me. That unspoken thing. Yeah.
So just yesterday I received a letter from the school. I'm not sure where it emanated from, but it's a letter written by old boys at the school where my 2 sons attend. And it spoke about exactly what Cameron is speaking about, how as a person of color, you feel like you are in somebody else's space. Even though you are there on merit, on, everything supposedly indicates that you should be there, but then there is this unspoken culture which tends towards whiteness, which manifests in various ways. So your name is not pronounced properly, or you are called by somebody else's name who just happens to look like you, and so Mervyn, I think it's deeply embedded, and and therefore becomes almost unseen, unnoticed,
but felt very deeply.
Very deeply.
Yeah. We have a great opportunity as Christians in one church to do things differently. Romans 12, don't be conformed to the pattern of the age. Be transformed through the renewing of your mind. Cam, with Red Post, you speak about being innovative, Christ-centered, but also transcultural. How do you think we as Christians can do better, can do different, can model something new? We're meant to be a light to the world. We're meant to provide an alternative model for people, something that they can want to be part of. How do you think we can be more sensitive to the things that you're talking about, this kind of unwritten script? You're not, so that you don't feel out of place, but you feel at home. What are some of the things that we as Christians can be doing, would you say?
I think, like, we've had this conversation. This is, and it's still ongoing. And I think the first one is, like Paul encourages us to really mourn with those who mourn, and especially feel our pain and feel our plight in this world. And we're meant to do that as Christians, especially as one body. And I think it goes back to what you said at the start, listening more.
Yeah.
Because too many times we put up our defensive, it's true, but. It's true, but did you see how corrupt the government is? And then it's like a big story, which is, I was listening to in the States. So I listened to a lot of NBA basketball, and one of the football players, in light of this, said that, okay, I'll never stand up for people who disrespect the flag and who don't respect the soldiers that have fought for their freedom. And he's getting, rightfully so, pushback, because they're saying you're speaking out of privilege.
Yeah.
And so you're fighting, like many white and black people fought the wars, but the black people never received the same privileges that you have. And so I think what's happening in the church is that many people should realize that they also are speaking from a position of privilege.
Yeah.
And they're speaking sometimes in a way that sometimes it does not understand my experience of how I've experienced the world differently, and I see it differently. And so therefore you have to understand more from my perspective.
Corin, just before you come there, just to engage with something that Cameron is saying. And Cameron, I must say I've found that enormously helpful personally in our conversations, because as a white South African who feels these things, I also feel powerless. And sometimes I feel like almost I'm being silenced. And often you're confronted with all these things, and I'm thinking to myself, what can I do to change all of this? How do I, person one, me, change structural racism in our country or in our denomination or in our church or whatever it is? And sometimes that burden to do something is quite a heavy burden. And I think there are a lot of people in our congregation, young white people, older white people, who feel they want to do something, but they kind of feel almost that they haven't got the right to speak or the right to act. And your comment to me some time back now is, all I need you to do is to listen. Was very liberating for me, because in a way it said to me, listen, but it also told me, hey, mate, I recognize that you can't fix everything, but what you can do is listen to me and take that posture. And it's been quite empowering for me, actually, to be given the freedom to do something, even if that something is listening, which is a good start. Corin.
I want to pick up on that as well, Mervyn, because I think I mentioned yesterday I had this very similar conversation with a friend of mine, whom you happen to know. And it's not a case of necessarily, I speak for myself, of silencing the other. It is more, I think it's more helpful to look at it from the point of view, perhaps now, in this space, at this time, in this context, it is appropriate to listen. And on this issue.
Yeah.
To listen.
Yeah.
And as we do the work in our church, in the church and in our church, of working towards, and I hesitate to say this, working towards unity, because actually we are one in Christ.
Yes.
We are one body. Sometimes we don't behave that way, but if one part of the body hurts, the other hurts as well.
Yeah.
And in that space, can we not just listen and sit with that hurt?
Yeah.
Hear the other.
Yeah.
And I think also with regards to structural racism, and especially why it's important to listen, especially like as a white person, is because sometimes you just won't see your privilege.
Yeah.
Like you just won't understand it because it's because it's something that is normal to you, and it sometimes feels like, no, that's the way it should be.
Yeah.
But no, it's not the way that it should be. It's just you're speaking from a position of privilege, and I need to make you aware of it.
Yeah.
Hence why, like, this issue will not be solved by us black people or people of color. We need each other.
Yeah.
Like, I really need you as the leader of the church and as the pastor and as a fellow brother to speak to everyone and tell them, like, guys, realize the position that we find ourselves in. Realize the pain of our fellow brother and citizens. Because they're far more better will listen to you than they will to me, because then they'll see me as Marxism,
or the angry black-colored woman, if it comes from me.
Exactly that.
I say this all the time.
Yeah, and so you just now are becoming like Julius, and it's like, no, I'm actually expressing my pain.
Cameron and Corin, this is such a huge issue. We could be here for hours talking about it, and certainly this conversation, valuable and encouraging as it's been, isn't the end of the conversation. It's really only the beginning. Just to kind of wrap up, Cam, from your side, last comments, things that you feel need to be said, often go unsaid.
I think one of the things that we need to grow as Christians is that we need to be loving to one another, and part of being loving is communicating truth. For me as a Christian, I needed to realize the truthfulness of my sin and the need for God to intervene in my life. And for us to have this conversation, we need to communicate the truth. And this is from my perspective. And one of the things which really we need to understand and grasp is that when we think about whiteness or white privilege or white supremacy, we need to understand that it's rooted in sin. It's rooted in the manifestations of sin. It's rooted in privilege. It's rooted in, I could say, theft. It's rooted in power. And it's rooted in the structures that we have. And for us, we need to grapple with that and understand that that's why we feel the way that we do. And that's why we need to change our ways and change even our structures. And this is where probably you and I debate quite a bit on. I think I'm tired of waiting for change.
Yes.
Like let it be a process. I'd say no, change needs to happen now.
Yeah.
Like it's enough talking. And I think this lynching of this man, it's not like it's the first time it's happened. It's always been there. It's just that now it's being videotaped.
Yeah.
And therefore the frustration comes up. And I think one of the things which good things I hope that can come out of this is that it puts it right in your face. And we have to face it and talk about it.
When you look at that imagery.
But
lynchings it's I mean, I say, but on reflection, it is the word. It might not have been a rope around a tree, but it's that thing. And I can see that speaks to people, and really they feel the pain of that. Yeah. Corin, last comments from your side?
Yes, Mervyn, I want to agree with Cameron that, we have to face these things head on. We can't hide anymore. We have to name it what it is.
Yes.
It is sin.
Yes.
The way I think about somebody, if I think about that person wrongly, incorrectly, as anything less than made in God's image, as a brother or a sister in Christ, it is sin.
Yeah.
And what does unity look like? What does it look like? It's easy to say those words. Yeah. We are one in Christ. But do I listen when my brother speaks?
Yeah.
When my sister speaks about her pain, her woundedness? Do I listen, and do I care enough to stop the narrative in my own head and really enter into her or his pain?
Just, I've been doing these afternoon teas in the book of Romans, and just as you're speaking, as both of you are speaking, I remembered something that Paul wrote, that we are to outdo one another in showing honor. Isn't that a lovely phrase? We should outdo one another in showing honor. So God help me and all of us to outdo one another in showing honor to each other, in honoring one another as fellow human beings, and in celebrating our differences, both in the way we look and in the way we sound, and also celebrate the great unity of our common humanity, and for those of us here in this conversation, our common Christianity. And what a day it's going to be, when Jesus returns. And we recognize that though we've got to fight for justice, we've got to fight for things right in this world, just as we've got to fight against sin, we've got to fight for the things that we want to see right, and fight against the sin of racism and prejudice and racial profiling. I don't want a black person walking down my street to be asked, "Can I help you?" on the assumption that they don't belong there. That kind of bizarre thing.
But can I say this, Mervyn?
Yeah.
Just in light of that, I think you opening up and having this space, I think it communicates a lot, and it says a lot.
Yeah.
And so thank you for that.
Pleasure.
But the thing is, we need to have these conversations at a table. We can't leave the table.
No.
And we need to face them head on, and I need to listen to you, and you have to listen to me. Because we are brothers in Christ.
Nobody
and I
should
think
leave the room.
no one should leave.
And can we replicate what we are doing here?
Yes,
Can it have a ripple effect so that
Please, Lord.
Please,
that
Lord.
this can be, a model as well as just a conversation. Folks, thank you so much for joining us for this conversation, for listening in. I hope that this conversation will provoke you to have similar conversations, and that what you've heard today will help you in your thinking, encourage you. I began by saying that Unspoken is about talking about things that often aren't talked about, and sometimes sadly aren't talked about in the Christian environment. We need public square Christianity. We need a voice, a clear Christian voice, into this world of noise and fake news and prejudice and hurt. Thank God for the gospel and for the difference that the gospel makes. We hope that if you are as yet someone on the outside looking in to the Christian faith, that this conversation will have whetted your appetite to find out more about Jesus. One thing that myself and Cameron and Corin can say is that Jesus has made the difference, and in some ways our common faith in Jesus has been the key to this conversation happening. So thank you for joining us. God bless you. We look forward to seeing you again.